Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. You know, some people think the Dogman is a real animal, like a bear or a moose. Other people attribute strange powers to it, like the ability to hypnotize its prey. Others think it originates in another reality altogether. Which are true, if any? After all, more people probably don't even think Dogman exists at all if you think about it. All we really have is the folklore and personal anecdotal accounts, and this episode has a few more to add to the confusing pile of them. Although each of the authors today seems passionate about their perception of the Dogman, I don't know if anyone will have a truly convincing argument until or unless an actual specimen of a real-life dog-headed hairy man can be presented for everyone to examine for themselves. Until that time, we'll have to make do with 3 more scary Dogman stories. Before we begin, though, I'd like to thank Sherman McIntyre, who is today's executive producer. Thanks, Sherman. We couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Sherman McIntyre, just join our very affordable paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. With all the recent changes, we literally couldn't do the show without our paid subscribers. And now, let's jump into today's first story. It's a tale sent in by a viewer who claims he knows for an absolute fact that Dogman is a real animal. He says there isn't anything paranormal or supernatural about it, but that it's just far wilder and more vicious than any other predator on the North American continent, and that's what's kept it hidden from the mainstream until now. But I'll let him tell you about it in the story he calls I Left Food Out for Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I know Dogman is a real animal. I know this for a fact. I also know that trying to interact with one is a mistake. I learned both of these things the hard way because I left food out for Dogman. This all started when I rented a house in rural Pennsylvania back about 20 or 21 years ago. I had just broken up with my wife, and this was a cheap place that I could drive to my job from. It was a little further out in the boonies than what I would have preferred, but divorces are expensive, and I viewed the home as temporary. It was nice though, I'm not saying it wasn't. It's just that the place was in Dogman territory. I saw one my first week, plain as day, even though it was the night. I had turned on the backyard lights, and damned if I didn't see deer and raccoons and all sorts of creatures out there at night. But the most memorable and life-changing of all was the bipedal hairy monster man that I saw running between trees not more than 75 feet from the couch I was sitting on at the time. From that point forward, I didn't watch TV at that place. I would sit with my wife's annoying Chihuahua dog that she somehow forced me to take by the window, and we would watch the night instead. The Dogman didn't make a return appearance, so I decided to invite him back. I got deer meat from some smelly store I found in the phone book, remember those? And I hung it out in the trees. Too high, I hoped, for any other carnivore to grab. I then went back inside with the Chihuahua, and we watched and watched. We didn't see the Dogman, so we went to bed. In the morning, however, the meat had been taken. I ran out to the area to look for tracks, but the ground was hard, and if tracks were there, I certainly didn't see them. I decided to get more meat after work that day and hang it out that night. I had also decided that I was going to be the first human being to ever make friends with and tame a wild, feral, North American, upright walking canine. After another trip to the butcher, getting cheaper cuts this time because I was running out of change, I drove back to the house only to find that one of the windows had been smashed in from the outside and my wife's annoying chihuahua was missing. It was the window right by where he liked to sleep during the day that was broken. I couldn't find the dog anywhere inside or outside the house, and I wondered if I should call my wife, my ex-wife, and tell her about it, or just let it slide and hope she'd figure it out eventually. I mean, she forced me to take that dog, but you know that once it went missing, it would be her dog again, and I would be negligent. I was wondering who broke in the house, as nothing seemed to be taken other than the dog. I called the cops, who took up an hour or more of time, then told me they doubted they'd find anything out for me, and left. Once they were gone, I went out to hang up the meat for that night. I still wanted to get another chance to see the Dogman. It was already dark by then, so I was hurrying up about it this time. As I reached the edge of the yard by the woods, I saw that there was something looking back at me. Something with glowing eyes. Idiotically, my first reaction was curiosity. What has golden yellow eye shine in these woods? I heard a pretty unmistakable dog growl coming from the same direction of that eye shine, and my insides just froze on the spot. It was the biggest shock of my life as the odor of the thing wafted over to me, and I knew I was now in the presence of a very large, hairy, dog-headed monster. I threw the deer meat down and ran as fast as I could back toward the house. As I reached the door, I looked back and saw the creature had smelled the meat, then decided to pursue me instead. In the time it took for me to swing the door open and shut it again, that Dogman was on my back porch, tugging at the outside of the door. I barely got the lock slipped in. If I had been a second later, that Dogman would have torn the door away from me and been able to come inside and finish me off. I suddenly didn't want to be in that home anymore. I knew a cheap motel, and I wanted to get to it. I decided to go there for the night, but the problem was that my car was in the old garage, which was on the other side of that raging Dogman banging at the back door. I called a cab service instead and packed a bag quickly while it came over. When I saw it out in front of the house, I ran out with my luggage toward the cab, anxious to get as far away from that home as soon as possible. When I was about midway from the house to the cab, though, out of my peripheral vision, I saw a nightmare running at me. It was the most insane-looking thing. The expression on the dog monster was like nothing that should have been on the face of a living creature. The cab driver saw that thing, and he just drove on out of there, hit the gas and was gone like that. So I had to drop my luggage and beat it back to the house. From inside, I watched as the immense dog thing tore it all apart with its razor-sharp hands and feet. I watched most of my clothes get torn up, just the same as the rest of my life already had been. Sure, why not? Go for it, Dogman. So I was trapped in that house. I couldn't get to my garage where the car was, and I couldn't even get to the curb without that Dogman wrecking things. I felt really depressed and overwhelmed, and I just started to cry. This was like how my macho friend used to always describe me, crying when the going got tough. We can call him Sinestro because he has a high hairline and he turns pink when he gets sunburned. I could just imagine telling him this story. He'd be like, I wouldn't have been trapped there by that Dogman. I'd have exercised my 2A rights all over that mother, and I've reclaimed my home in the land of the free and the home of the brave, or whatever. But thinking that thought gave me an idea. Maybe if I asked Sinestro to come over here, ready to defend both of us, maybe I could make it into his car and get to that motel so I could have a good night's sleep. But I'd have to convince Sinestro that I was really in trouble. And what were the chances he would believe I was being attacked by an upright walking canine? As it turned out, he was, and is, a huge Dogman fan, and he'd been wanting to have the head of one of them on his wall for some time. So he was over there in less than 25 minutes with a friend of his who was equally as prepared for defense. After arriving, they exited their vehicle and both staked out the front yard area. They informed me when it would be safe to come out, hustled me into the vehicle, and we sped off without ever having to see or deal with the monster Dogman again. Sinestro let me stay at his place during much of the rest of my divorce, and he turned out to be a pretty good guy. He also told me that I brought all this trouble on myself by leaving that meat out for the Dogman. Apparently, dogmen are not appreciative creatures. I thought it would become my friend and become tame, but according to Sinestro, giving it a ton of meat I couldn't really afford to buy only made me look submissive to it in the Dogman's own glowing eyes. That's why it took my chihuahua, and that's why it tried to take me. It could have had a steady supply of free meat, but that kind of Dogman lives in the present moment. It doesn't care if you're going to give it food tomorrow. If you're acting like prey today, it'll eat you right now, never thinking or caring about tomorrow. So as bad as that situation was, it could have been a whole heck of a lot worse, because I left food out for the Dogman. I felt compelled by the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a Dogman incident happen to me I guess around 17 or 18 years ago when I went hunting with my two buddies out in the Pennsylvania State Game Lands up in Venango County. That's out in the northwest part of Pennsylvania, almost as close to Cleveland in Ohio as it is to Pittsburgh. It's either nearby or else maybe technically a part of the Allegheny National Forest, if that gives you any bearings. We were hunting down by the South Sandy Creek, which was the only place I personally had ever gone to hunt. My buddies were a lot more experienced than I was, but for whatever reason they decided they only invited me along when they were going to this one area. It had never been very active when I had been there, and they had begun to call me their bad luck charm. In fact, this was the story about how they became convinced I really was bad luck. This was also the last time they ever invited me to go hunting with them. The area around that creek is pretty heavily forested, or at least it was the times I was there. My friends never had any rhyme or reason to their approach. We would party and drink for a while, then we'd walk around trying to be quiet and looking for animals. Then we'd take a break to party again. Now, I don't know anything about hunting, but it seemed to me that there had to be a better approach than this one. By early evening, my buddies needed a nap. They both leaned against a tree and passed out, snoring lightly. I felt like it was getting too dark to be where we were, but I knew that if I didn't let them sleep it off a little bit, I was never going to get them to go home. I checked the time and resolved to allow them a 20-minute nap. Then I would rouse them and suggest strongly that we head back. After the first minute or two, I started thinking I was hearing something. As it turned out, I really was hearing something, but at that point, I didn't know it for sure yet. I made a point to listen and to stare into the woods in the direction of where I thought I was hearing things. This must have gone on for 5 to 7 or 8 minutes, but to me, it felt like it was hours. I wanted to try to wake those guys so badly, but I had promised to give them the full 20 minutes. I was genuinely frightened by that point. To me, It sounded like something large was moving around. So unless it was a deer, that meant trouble. I wasn't sure it wasn't a person as well. And if it were human, was it a good guy or a bad guy? I hugged my weapon and tried to breathe deeply. My hands were shaking anyway. When the creature decided to make its appearance, it didn't do so in a half-hearted way. It didn't peek out or stroll out. That dog-like bear ape made an entrance. I mean, like Shatner bounding into a scene. This creature acted like he expected applause from an audience upon his appearance. All of a sudden, bam! There was a man monster taller than any basketball player standing in front of me, acting all ghetto and threatening toward me like I stole his girlfriend or something. I screamed, and I don't care what you think about it, because that was just about the last thing in the world I ever would have been expecting to see happen. I remember that my screaming woke up my two buddies, but then things start to get a little fuzzy for me. I locked eyes with the Dogman, and it was like a weird pulling and tugging effect began inside me. I felt like I knew what it was, like I understood it, and that it posed a great threat to me. While I understood it very clearly in those few seconds, I forgot almost all of the feeling once we eventually looked away from each other. It was like when you have an intense dream, but then as soon as you wake up, you start to forget it. I would explain better what it was that I thought I was feeling or sensing or knowing if I could remember it better. But the main point is, I think, that even when I was sensing all of this about the Dogman, it did not cause me to feel any less frightened, and it did not cause the Dogman to behave in any way less hostile. According to my buddies, I started walking toward the monster at that point like some sort of zombie under his control. I have vague memories of the two of them forcing me to stop looking the creature in its eyes, which created an instant amnesia effect inside my brain. According to them, they walked me to the car, then home. I don't really remember very much of that, but I ended up home, so I must have gotten there somehow. I'm still friends with those two, but we only meet for drinks these days. They say I'm bad luck on a hunting trip, and they joke that I threw them over for the Dogman. People always ask me to tell them in detail what the animal or man looked like, so I'm going to go ahead and get to that now. It was tall, it was dark, it was furry. It was very muscular, but I would say that it had more of a basketball player's physique than a football player's. It was more massive and muscular than a basketball player usually is, though. I don't know what color the fur was, but it was dark, and as far as I can remember, it was uniform all over. I think it had pointed ears, but they were held backward in anger for the entire episode that I remember, so I can't be 100% sure. Its eyes glowed like a cat's eyes in the dark, but the snout of the creature was long like a canine and not in any way like that of a feline. I don't know if it was his strange-looking eyes or if he was emitting infrasound or what, but I found it hard to run after I had met eyes with the thing. If it hadn't been for my two buddies pulling me away, I would have just kept walking toward the creature. And this was all while I was most keenly aware that the creature had ill intentions toward me. This was while I was gripped by its glowing eyes. I can't explain to you how it happened or what it meant. All I can tell you for certain is I felt compelled by the Dogman. Dogman is a demonic god of ancient origin. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I got involved in a weird cult and they summoned a demon. I can't even begin to tell you about the ritual we all performed. I think just to describe it would get you kicked off the internet. Safe to say, it was the most horrible thing I've ever lived through. And in the circle, within the boundary we set for it on the ground, stood the demonic dog thing. It looked exactly like how people describe a dogman, right down to the glowing eyes. It barked, and somehow the high priest seemed to understand the thing. I became ill while this was happening and was viewed as weak by the others. I managed to escape and lived in hiding for decades. I'm still very paranoid about going too public, as I believe some parts of that sect are still in existence. I'd rather they never think about me, so I still keep a low profile. There was a time about 5 years ago when they were looking for me. I know this because I was having terrible dreams, and one night I woke up and I saw the demon-eyed Dogman in my room with me. I couldn't move my body as he just stood there, steam coming from his nostrils, his eyes looking like burning hot coals. It was so tall that it had to bend over to fit in my room. I thought it was going to take me with it, but I don't think it ever saw me. Somehow, something protected me on that night. The Dogman managed to find my room, yet even as he stood a few feet from me, he was unable to identify me and finish his task of ending my days. So far, nothing else has happened, and I can only hope that I never see the Dogman again. But I've been thinking a lot about that old sect lately, and I feel like I should write this all down. God bless and protect anyone out there stuck in a situation like this. It isn't fair to never get to have a normal life like everyone else, but I suggest enjoying the ordinary parts of life as much as you can. Watch the sunrises and the sunsets. Enjoy the friends and the cats and the dogs and the fun times, because no matter how much you may try to forget, you will always remember that, underneath the sunny days and the thunderstorms both, Dogman is a demonic god of ancient origin. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.